The sun was dipping low in the sky, painting everything with soft shades of orange and gold. People were moving through the station as usual. There was the familiar buzz of travelers hurrying with their luggage, parents chasing after toddlers who had already spotted the train doors, and the distant sound of announcements echoing over the loudspeakers. The place smelled faintly of coffee, cleaning polish, and a hint of rain that had fallen earlier. Life was moving fast, as it always did. Some faces were tired from long journeys, others were full of excitement for trips ahead. No one really paid attention to anyone else. Everyone caught up in their own world. Among the moving crowd, a young woman walked slowly, almost cautiously, carrying a small bag over her shoulder. She wasn't dressed in anything remarkable, just a simple coat and plain shoes. But there was something about her that made her stand out to those who happened to glance her way. Not in a loud or flashy way, but in a quiet, almost unnoticed way. She moved with a certain rhythm, careful but deliberate, as if she had a reason to be exactly where she was, even though no one else knew what it was. At the corner of the station, tucked away near a wall of glass and metal, was a piano. It was one of those public pianos that people could play if they wanted. Over time, many people had ignored it, or had only tapped a few notes, not expecting anything special. Some travelers had played songs from memory, simple melodies, mostly clumsy or short. Sometimes a few passengers would stop and listen, nod politely, then move on. Over the years, the piano had seen countless hands, some gentle, some hurried, but it never really demanded attention. That is, until she approached it. She paused for a moment in front of the piano. Her fingers hovered in the air, like she was thinking, like she was deciding something. People walked past her, some glancing curiously, most not even noticing her. A few people whispered to each other, casting small looks of doubt. "Do you think she can play?" one asked. "Looks like she doesn't even belong here," another replied quietly. A few smirked, a few simply shook their heads and carried on. She didn't look nervous, at least not in the way most people think of nerves. Her eyes were calm, steady, almost reflective. It was like she had carried this moment inside her for a long time, waiting for the right time to step forward. She adjusted her bag, then set it down gently beside the piano. She took a slow breath, the kind that seems to fill your chest with courage without you even realizing it. And then, with hands that seemed small and delicate, she touched the keys. The first sound was soft, almost too soft for the bustling station to notice. A few people did stop, caught by the gentle tapping, but most continued walking. Some travelers even covered their ears for a second, thinking it was a child playing badly. But the woman didn't stop. She kept her fingers on the keys, exploring, feeling the weight of each note. Her hands moved with a quiet confidence, yet there was no rush, no show. It was simple, almost invisible. But there was an honesty in the sound that could not be ignored if one paid attention. A young man passing by paused. He was holding a cup of coffee and scrolling through his phone. He looked up for a moment, tilting his head slightly. There was curiosity in his eyes, a flicker that said, "Why does this sound different?" He didn't understand it yet. The woman was not playing a song anyone knew. There were no famous melodies, no loud riffs, no complicated finger tricks, just the notes. But the notes seemed to breathe. They moved through the air in a way that was unexpected. The melody was not complete, it was not perfect, but it was honest. And somehow, that honesty was strange and beautiful. Another listener appeared, an older woman waiting for her train, holding a small suitcase. She had been tired, lost in thought, wondering how she would make it to her appointment on time. But now, the sound pulled her out of her fog. She leaned on her suitcase, staring without realizing it. Her lips parted slightly, and a soft sigh escaped. She wasn't aware of why she was so affected. The music wasn't flashy or grand, yet it touched something in her heart that she didn't even know was waiting to be touched. More people stopped. Some leaned against walls, some crouched to adjust their children, all turning their heads toward the soft, flowing music. Slowly, the station started to quiet. The announcements continued over the speakers. The distant clatter of trains remained, but around the piano it felt like another world was opening. Even the footsteps of travelers slowed. People forgot about time for a moment. They forgot about the trains, the schedules, the phone calls they were waiting for. They just listened. The woman's face remained calm as she played. She didn't smile or frown. Her expression was neutral, but there was something alive in her eyes, something that spoke without words. She wasn't performing for anyone. She wasn't showing off. She was sharing something that was hers, something she had held inside for a long time. Every note seemed to carry a story, every pause a memory, in the station. Normally so loud and chaotic, had become a space of quiet reflection. A small boy, no older than 7, stopped near his mother. He had been tugging at her sleeve, wanting to go look at the toy shop. But now he was still, watching her hands move across the piano. He tilted his head as if trying to understand why the music felt different. His mother smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from his face, realizing that even he could feel the subtle magic of the moment. A man in a uniform, part of the station's staff, had been walking by with his cleaning cart. He paused, leaning against the cart, resting his chin on his hand. He was tired, running through his long shift, thinking of the hours left before he could go home. But the music made him stop, made him think of something he had not thought of in years. Memories of a childhood long gone, of piano lessons he had once had, of someone he had loved and lost, of it bubbled to the surface in the soft echo of the keys. He swallowed hard, unsure why he felt tears prickling at the corner of his eyes. The woman continued to play. She didn't rush. She didn't look at anyone, but somehow, the people who were stopping to listen felt connected to her. Her music was not loud or flashy, but it was alive. There was a rhythm in her pauses, a thoughtfulness in every note, and a carefulness in the way her fingers touched the keys. It was like she was speaking a language that everyone could understand without needing words. Some people began to whisper, "Who is she? I've never seen her before. She plays differently." There was curiosity, but also a kind of respect forming, almost instinctively. It wasn't the skill that impressed them at first. It was the honesty, the emotion, the feeling that somehow this music was coming from a real place inside her, and not just from talent alone. As the first part of her song flowed through the air, it started to change the way people moved. Some travelers who had been walking quickly slowed down, almost unconsciously. A few who had been about to leave the station sat down on nearby benches, unable to resist listening further. Even the station seemed to adjust, the usual noise fading, giving room for the music to grow. The air felt different, filled with something soft and electric at the same time. Her fingers continued dancing across the keys. Each movement was deliberate, yet effortless. She seemed unaware of the attention building around her. She was not performing for an audience. She was simply expressing something that had waited inside her for a long time. People started to feel emotions they didn't know they would feel in a busy station. Some were smiling, some teary, some simply quiet. And all of them were caught in the same moment without saying a word. Even those who had doubted her at first, the ones who smirked, who whispered comments under their breaths, found themselves stopping in surprise. Their faces changed from doubt to curiosity to awe. They realized that what they had thought was going to be ordinary or clumsy was not at all. There was depth here. There was feeling. There was life. Something unexpected was happening, and they could not turn away. Time began to stretch. 10 minutes felt like an hour, and yet no one minded. A few trains arrived, doors opened and closed. Travelers continued their routines, but around the piano, time had paused. The young woman was playing, and the station, even if only for a moment, had become a place of wonder. People who had been strangers were now silently sharing an experience together, feeling something human and deep, carried in the gentle sound of a piano. The music, soft at first, grew, not in loudness, but in complexity. It was as if she was telling a story without words. She played slowly, then faster, then slower again, creating a rhythm that seemed to mimic the way hearts beat, the way breaths rise and fall, the way emotions flow. Each note had weight, and yet the melody was fragile, delicate, almost shy. But underneath it all, there was a quiet strength, a resilience that drew people in, a sense that this moment was something rare, something important. No one spoke. No one moved. Everyone was listening. The woman's presence, her calm and quiet energy, filled the space more than any noise ever could. People began to notice that she did not play for attention, did not seek applause, did not care if anyone noticed her. She played because she had to, because this moment was hers. And somehow, in the act of sharing it, she gave a gift to everyone around her, and for the first time that day, in that busy station filled with noise and hurry, people stopped. They listened. They felt, they realized that sometimes something unexpected could happen in the most ordinary places, and no one could have guessed what would come next. The music continued, soft and deliberate, yet there was now a subtle change in the energy around the piano. People who had been casually listening now leaned forward, unable to resist the pull of the melody. It was no longer just sound. It had started to feel like a story unfolding in the air, a story that spoke directly to each person's heart. Some travelers crossed their arms, trying to resist being affected, but their feet stopped moving before they realized it. A businessman holding a briefcase looked at her hands, then back at the keys, and slowly lowered his briefcase. He had been rushing, focused on schedules and meetings, but now he found himself caught in a strange pause. There was a tension he could not name, an emotional weight in the air, and it was coming from her alone. A young woman who had been dragging a small suitcase behind her leaned against the wall, eyes fixed on the piano. She had been tired running from one train to another, but now her shoulders relaxed. She let out a soft breath and rested her chin on her hand. There was a sudden quiet that fell over her, a moment where she forgot all the noise and the rush of the station. She had no idea why the music affected her so strongly, but it did. She felt a lump in her throat, the kind that rises when something real and human touches your soul unexpectedly. The young pianist's hands moved effortlessly. But there was no flash, no showmanship. Every note had weight, and yet the way she combined them felt natural and free, as if the music had been inside her, waiting quietly for the right moment to escape. Her fingers pressed the keys softly at times, and then, with a gentle strength, pulling emotion out of every sound. She was not trying to impress anyone, and yet everyone was drawn in, caught off guard by the depth of what they were hearing. A middle-aged man, carrying a small child on his shoulders, stopped walking. The child wriggled and laughed, but the man leaned slightly forward, holding the child steady. He didn't speak, didn't try to distract the child. Instead, he listened, his face slowly softening. Something in the music reminded him of days long gone, of a childhood that seemed distant now. He remembered a piano at home, the sound of someone teaching him, the warmth of evenings spent in music. And now, without any warning, that memory flooded back in the middle of a busy station. Others had started whispering to each other, their words hushed as if afraid to break the spell. She's good," one said quietly, almost like admitting it would make it go away. Another shook their head, trying to process what they were hearing. They had expected simple, unremarkable notes from someone who looked so ordinary. And yet here she was, commanding attention without a word, without moving from her place. The contrast between her quiet presence and the strength of her music only made the effect stronger. Some people began recording with their phones, but even they lowered their devices quickly, realizing that no camera could truly capture what was happening. The sound was more than music. It was a presence, a feeling, a living thing that flowed through the station and touched everyone differently. Some felt sadness, some joy, some longing they couldn't name. And yet none of them wanted the moment to end. The young pianist closed her eyes for a brief moment, and the notes shifted. They became deeper, slower, resonating in a way that seemed to reach inside each listener. The crowd around her had grown, though no one realized it at first. People who had been walking hurriedly stopped, those sitting on benches leaned forward, and some simply stood still, caught in the spell. A few even forgot where they were going, lost in the music. A woman holding a toddler in her arms felt a tear slip down her cheek. She brushed it away quickly, embarrassed that anyone might notice, but she couldn't stop herself. The music had touched her unexpectedly, stirred memories of her own childhood, her own mother who had loved music and who was no longer there. She tightened her hold on the child and let herself listen fully. Feeling both pain and comfort in the same moment, the man who had been in uniform earlier now leaned on a pillar, eyes closed, letting the melody wash over him. He had never thought of himself as emotional, had always considered himself practical, and yet here he was, unable to resist. He could feel his heart racing slightly, memories he had pushed aside returning with a gentle, insistent force. He realized how much he had missed moments like this, how much he had missed feeling fully alive in a way that wasn't about deadlines or obligations. Even the small boy who had been watching earlier now stood closer, his mother holding him steady. He looked up at her and whispered, "Why does it feel so? Sad and happy at the same time?" She didn't answer immediately, because she didn't know how to. She only nodded, understanding that sometimes music spoke words that no one could explain. It was a lesson she had not expected her child to learn, but here it was, shared in a quiet, unremarkable station with a stranger at a piano. A group of teenagers had gathered near the entrance. Initially laughing and joking, thinking the music would be boring, but now they were silent, leaning against walls, listening. One of them pulled out headphones, unsure if it would ruin the experience, but even that small distraction didn't matter. They had never heard anything like this before. The sound was raw, real, and alive. It demanded attention in a way that no flashy performance ever could. The young pianist opened her eyes briefly, scanning the small crowd without looking directly at anyone. She didn't smile, she didn't gesture, she just continued, letting the music flow naturally from her fingers. The melody had grown richer, more complex, yet it never felt forced. Every note seemed to have a purpose, as if it had been waiting a long time to be played. The listeners felt the depth without needing to understand it. They only felt it, and that was enough. People who had initially doubted her were now caught completely off guard. Some whispered, "How? How is she doing that?" "She's amazing," another said, almost in disbelief. They had been ready to dismiss her, ready to walk away, and now they were trapped by something entirely unexpected. It was as if the music had revealed a secret truth about her, about life, about human emotion itself. They had been wrong to judge her, and the realization was sudden and striking. The station itself seemed to change. The usual harsh lighting softened in the glow of the evening sun streaming through the windows. Even the echoes of announcements and train sounds faded into the background. The air felt lighter, yet heavier with emotion. For a few brief moments, the ordinary world had transformed into something extraordinary. And everyone there could feel it. A woman holding a shopping bag stopped near a pillar. Resting her head against it as she listened, she had been tense, carrying worries from work and family, but now she felt a quiet release. Her shoulders loosened, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe fully. She didn't know why a stranger playing a piano could have this effect, but she didn't question it. She simply let the music fill the spaces inside her that's been empty for too long. The young pianist's hands moved faster now. But there was still control, still precision. The music carried a sense of urgency, so she was telling a story that could not wait. Yet even in the rush, it was measured, intentional, alive. People were leaning closer, eyes wide, feeling the energy shift around them. It was like watching someone reveal a piece of their soul without a word. And yet everyone understood it. A man who had been checking his watch suddenly looked up and realized he had no idea what time it was anymore. The minutes had passed without notice, and he didn't care. The music had captured him fully. He found himself smiling softly, feeling emotions he hadn't felt in a long time. He realized that this moment, this unexpected gift of someone sharing herself so openly, was rare and precious. Even the small interruptions, the clatter of luggage wheels, the distant announcements, the occasional cough did not break the spell. The music absorbed everything, weaving it into the melody, creating a shared experience that included everyone present, regardless of their attention before. The station had become a living, breathing entity in response to her playing, and the people there had become part of it without realizing it. Some passengers began to move closer, drawn magnetically toward the piano. A few sat on the floor, unsure why they were doing it, but unable to resist. Others leaned over railings, craning their necks to see her hands. The space around the piano had transformed. What was once a corner of a busy station had become a stage, but one that no one had prepared for. And yet everyone knew that they were witnessing something extraordinary. And still, the young pianist remained calm. She did not raise her head, did not seek validation, did not care about applause or attention. She played because it was what she had to do, and in that necessity, she gave life to every note. People could feel it, and the effect was undeniable. Whispers turned into quiet exclamations. Eyes widened, jaws dropped slightly, hands covered mouths in awe. Even those who had been skeptical, those who had been sure this would be nothing special, found themselves captivated. They realized that they had misjudged her entirely. They had expected simple, ordinary music, and instead they were experiencing something profound. The melody shifted again, softer now, slower, like a gentle wave washing over everyone present. The emotions in the crowd were raw, some teary, some smiling, some silent with wonder. Each person experienced it differently, yet all shared the same invisible bond, quiet understanding that something remarkable had just happened. For a few moments, nobody dared to move. The station continued its rhythm in the background, but near the piano, time had stopped. People were not thinking about trains or schedules or their next appointment. They were present, fully and deeply, experiencing a moment that would remain in their memory long after they had left. And in the midst of it all, she played, completely unaware of the effect she had on everyone. She was not performing. She was living her truth through music. And that, more than skill or showmanship, was what made it unforgettable. The melody began to shift. At first it was subtle, barely noticeable, but gradually the music took on a new depth. The notes became richer, heavier, yet somehow lighter at the same time. It was a rhythm that seemed to breathe, as though the piano itself was alive, responding to something only the young woman could feel. The people who had been quietly listening now leaned in closer, instinctively sensing that the moment was changing, that something extraordinary was about to happen. A few travelers who had been tapping their feet or checking, their phones froze completely. Their eyes widened as if they were seeing a different world unfold before them. The station's usual chaos, the shouts, the rolling luggage, the distant train whistles faded into the background. Every sound seemed distant and unimportant. All that existed was the piano and the music that was pouring from it, shaping the space around them in ways no one could have anticipated. Her hands moved faster now, but there was no frantic energy. Every key pressed felt intentional, almost sacred. The music swelled and softened, rose and fell like waves on a quiet sea. The emotional intensity grew with each note, reaching into the hearts of the listeners in ways they had never expected. Some felt a lump in their throat, some felt tears welling up, and others felt a strange warmth spread through their chest. It was not sorrow or joy alone. It was a complex mix, a raw truth that could not be described with words. A man who had been rushing through the station earlier stopped in his tracks, gripping his briefcase tightly. He had been thinking about deadlines, meetings, emails, and calls, but now all of that seemed meaningless. His eyes were fixed on the young woman's hands as they danced across the keys. He could not explain why he felt so affected, why a simple melody played by someone who had seemed ordinary could stir such powerful emotions within him. He felt exposed, vulnerable, yet strangely comforted. A woman holding a baby had stopped near a pillar, leaning her cheek against it, listening as if the piano had become a lifeline. She felt tears slipping down her cheeks, hot and surprising. The music reminded her of times she had thought were long-forgotten memories of her own childhood, of her mother singing softly in the kitchen, of moments of laughter she had shared with someone she had lost. Every note seemed to echo her own experiences. Touching a part of her that had been quiet and hidden for years, the young boy from earlier sat down on the floor, cross-legged, unable to move. His small hands rested on his knees, and he stared at the pianist with wide eyes. He did not understand the complexity of the music, but he could feel it in a way that was bigger than him. Something in the sounds made him feel connected, like he was part of a story being told without words. He whispered softly to his mother, "It feels like she's talking to us without speaking." She nodded silently, not needing to answer, for she felt the truth of his words as clearly as he did. Other people began to murmur softly among themselves, voices barely above a whisper. "I can't believe this," one said. "I've never heard anything like it," another replied. But the comments were soon swallowed by the music itself. No words seemed adequate to describe what was happening, and everyone felt it instinctively. The piano had become a bridge, connecting strangers in a shared moment of awe and wonder. The melody shifted again, this time darker, deeper. There was a sadness now that cut through the air, a sense of longing that seemed to touch something buried in everyone listening. A young woman sitting on a bench had buried her face in her hands, feeling the sting of tears. She didn't know why she was crying, only that the music had unearthed emotions she had ignored for too long. The station, normally a place of hurry and indifference, had transformed into a sanctuary. People from all walks of life were united by the invisible thread of sound that flowed through them. A man standing near the entrance, who had been skeptical at first, suddenly realized he could not look away. He had thought the young woman would play something simple, maybe clumsy, but now he understood how wrong he had been. There was mastery here, yes, but more than that, there was heart, intention, and truth. The music was not about technical perfection. It was about communicating something that words could not capture. It was alive, breathing, reaching into the depths of everyone present. Even the children who had been restless began to quiet down, their eyes following the young woman's movements. One little girl leaned against her mother, tugging at her sleeve. "Why does it make me feel like I'm flying?" she whispered. Her mother smiled, brushing the girl's hair back, understanding instinctively that this was something rare and profound. A moment of pure human connection that needed no explanation as the music continued. The notes began to intertwine in unexpected ways. There were sudden pauses, delicate moments of silence that were just as powerful as the sounds themselves. Each pause seemed to carry weight, giving space for reflection, for emotion to settle before being swept up again in the flow. The listeners were held in a delicate balance between anticipation and awe. Every eye was on her hands, every ear attuned to the subtle shifts, every heart beating in rhythm with the unfolding melody. A few people who had been trying to record the moment on their phones lowered them, realizing that no device could truly capture the experience. The sound was not just music, it was feeling, story, and energy all wrapped together. Trying to capture it as a video or a photo felt almost absurd. It was something that had to be felt, something that could only exist in the present. The young pianist didn't notice the growing crowd. She was focused, but not in a tense way. Her concentration was serene, purposeful. She was not performing for anyone. She was living through the music. The people around her could feel this authenticity, and it added another layer to their experience. They were not witnessing a show, they were sharing a human moment. One that was rare and fragile and utterly real. A man sitting on a bench had leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. He had been tired, worn down by work and life, but now he felt energized in a way he could not explain. The music stirred something inside him, reminding him of a passion he had long abandoned. He felt hope rising, small and fragile, yet insistent. It was as though the young woman's hands on the piano were reaching inside him and awakening something he had forgotten existed. The station staff, usually indifferent to the comings and goings of travelers, were now caught in the spell. Even the security personnel, who had been checking tickets and monitoring cameras, paused to listen. Their faces softened. They could not ignore the effect, the way the music wrapped around everyone and transformed the space. It was not loud or chaotic, but it demanded attention in a way that was impossible to resist. The music grew more dynamic, shifting from soft, gentle notes to stronger, more forceful ones. It was like the story she was telling was evolving, gaining momentum, revealing layers of emotion that no one had anticipated. People could feel the tension building, the crescendo approaching, though they did not know what would happen next. Each note seemed to carry anticipation, each chord a whisper of the climax yet to come. Some travelers who had been indifferent now stood with open mouths, completely captivated. They had entered the station expecting nothing, and yet here they were, witnessing something extraordinary, something that defied expectations. The music had transformed them, shifted their focus, made them feel emotions that had lain dormant for too long. Ah! A woman standing near a window pressed her hands together unconsciously. She had come to the station in a rush, her mind full of errands and responsibilities. Yet the music had forced her to stop and truly feel. It was unexpected, unplanned, and entirely human. She realized that this moment would stay with her, etched into her memory. A small but profound turning point in her day. The young boy, who had been sitting on the floor, now clapped his hands softly, almost hesitantly, as if unsure whether it was appropriate. But his mother smiled and whispered, "It's okay. It's beautiful." He nodded, eyes wide, completely absorbed. Children and adults alike felt drawn into the same world, caught together in an invisible thread of emotion and wonder. The music swelled to a peak. And then, almost imperceptibly, it softened again. The notes now carried a quiet strength, a lingering beauty that refused to be rushed. It was as if she were speaking directly to each person, reaching into them and leaving behind a small piece of herself. People felt it deeply, the impact settling gently yet powerfully. It was unexpected. It was unforgettable. For a brief moment, the entire station seemed to hold its breath. Travelers froze mid-step. Children stopped playing. Adults ceased their conversations. Even the distant sounds of the trains seemed to pause. All eyes were on her hands, all ears on the keys. And every heart seemed to beat in silent recognition of the moment's significance. The music began to shift again. Quieter now, more intimate, drawing each listener closer to their own emotions. A woman standing near the benches realized she was crying silently, brushing her tears away as though she had been caught. Yet she didn't stop listening. The melody spoke directly to her, telling stories she had forgotten, feelings she had hidden. The experience was both personal and collective, unique to each person, yet shared by all. The young pianist continued, unaware of the growing effect. She didn't glance at the crowd. She didn't gesture or call attention to herself. She simply played, and that, more than anything, made the moment real. The audience could feel that authenticity. They could feel the truth of it in every note, every pause, every delicate shift in rhythm. It was not performance. It was life unfolding in sound. The music slowed. It softened, not in weakness, but in intimacy. Each note seemed to linger longer than before, filling the station with warmth and quiet reflection. People's bodies relaxed, as if the tension that had been building for the past hour had finally found a release. Travelers who had been tense with schedules, impatient for trains, or weighed down by worries, now leaned closer to the sound, listening with undivided attention. The young pianist's hands moved gently across the keys, and each movement told a story. It was not a story anyone could put into words, yet everyone could feel it. A young woman, waiting for her train, hugged her arms around herself, as if the music was touching the very fibers of her being. She had not expected to be moved, certainly not by someone she had never met. Yet the truth in each note reached inside her, unearthing memories she had long buried. A memory of laughter with friends, a memory of her father's soft humming, a memory of evenings when she had been content and carefree, all mingled together in a sudden rush of emotion. A man, standing near a pillar, felt tears prick his eyes. He was the kind of person who rarely let his feelings show in public, who thought emotions were better kept inside. And yet here he was, unable to resist the pull of the music. Each note seemed to speak directly to him, as though she had known him all his life and understood exactly what he needed. He felt an ache of longing mixed with gratitude, an awareness of things he had ignored or forgotten. The music was not just sound. It was a mirror, reflecting his life and his emotions back at him in the most beautiful and unexpected way. Even the children who had been restless earlier now sat still, captivated. The little boy who had watched her first began to hum softly under his breath, instinctively following the rhythm. His mother smiled quietly, realizing that he was experiencing something pure and unfiltered, a connection to art and feeling that could not be taught, only lived. Another child tilted her head, her eyes wide, as though the music had opened a secret door in her heart. She didn't know why she felt the lump in her throat or the warmth in her chest, but she knew she wanted to stay in this moment forever. The station staff, who had been working and watching from a distance, now gathered near the piano. Even the security personnel who had seen countless performances before paused, caught in the undeniable effect of the music. They had witnessed hundreds of people passing through, some angry, some hurried, some indifferent. But they had never seen a crowd completely absorbed in a moment like this. The young woman's playing was extraordinary, not in the way of showy skill, but in its quiet power to make every listener feel something deeply human. Whispers began circulating through the crowd. People spoke in hushed tones, almost afraid to disturb the magic. "It's beautiful," someone said. "I've never heard anything like this," another whispered. A few people shook their heads in disbelief, unable to comprehend that someone so ordinary in appearance could create such extraordinary emotion. They had expected simple notes, perhaps a familiar song played poorly, and yet the reality was breathtaking. It was more than music, it was truth made audible, shared generously, and received gratefully by everyone present. A woman standing near the entrance, holding a small shopping bag, felt a rush of emotion she couldn't name. She pressed her hand to her chest as tears streamed down her face. She had not anticipated being moved in public, but she could not stop herself. The music was stirring something raw and essential inside her, a sense of longing and hope that she had kept hidden. She realized how much she had needed this moment, this unexpected pause from the demands of life, this gift of feeling deeply again. Even travelers rushing to catch trains slowed their pace. They glanced toward the piano, unsure why they felt compelled to stop. Some leaned against walls, others crouched or sat just to stay present in the experience. For a few minutes, the station was no longer a place of chaos and motion. It had become a sanctuary. Every person present felt a quiet sense of connection not only to the music but to each other. Strangers shared the same air, the same emotion, the same wonder, and it was all because of her. The young woman who played without thought of fame or recognition. The music grew more expressive, the melody weaving between softness and intensity. Some notes danced lightly, almost like a playful breeze, while others sank deep, heavy with emotion. Listeners felt themselves being carried along with every rise and fall, every subtle shift in rhythm and tone. It was impossible not to be drawn in. People leaned forward instinctively, their focus fully on the sound. Some mouths were slightly open in awe. Some hands covered their faces as tears continued to flow. And all the while, she played calmly, fully absorbed in the music itself. A man sitting on a bench held his head in his hands, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and hope. He could not articulate why he felt so affected, only that it seemed to awaken something he had long ignored. The music was reminding him that life was not just about deadlines, bills or obligations. It was about moments like this, moments of connection, of authenticity, of shared emotion. He lifted his head slightly, allowing himself to soak in the experience fully. The station around him still existed, but it no longer mattered. All that mattered was the piano and the music that flowed from it. A young woman who had been scrolling through her phone earlier now stood still, tears quietly falling. She pressed her hand against her lips, unable to stop herself from being affected. She realized that she had not allowed herself to feel in weeks, not truly. The music had bypassed her defenses, reached straight into her heart, reminded her of the simplicity and beauty of human emotion. She was stunned at how much a stranger, in a place as ordinary as a station, could give her something so profound. The young boy, now completely still, whispered, "It's like she's telling us a story." His mother nodded, unable to speak, for she felt the truth of his words. The music did tell a story, but not one that could be read or written. It was a story felt in the chest, in the throat, in the eyes, in the skin. It was a story of hope, of pain, of longing, of love, of connection, all told without a single word. Some people were laughing softly, not because they found it funny, but because the music had released something trapped inside them. The feeling was overwhelming in its honesty, and it demanded release. A small woman with gray hair dabbed at her eyes and laughed quietly, shaking her head in wonder. She realized that she had forgotten how it felt to be moved in this way, to feel raw, human emotion without apology. The music had reminded her of a truth she had overlooked for decades. Others were sobbing quietly, holding themselves as though the sound itself could comfort them. A young couple stood together, their hands intertwined, feeling emotions that had nothing to do with their surroundings, but everything to do with the music. They did not speak, they did not even glance at each other. They simply allowed themselves to exist in the sound, to experience the honesty and depth of the moment. Even those who had arrived late were drawn in immediately. Travelers hurrying through the station slowed, turning their heads, caught by the lingering notes. Some stepped closer, leaning against walls or sitting on the floor just to stay present. The music had grown beyond skill. It was now a force that demanded attention, respect, and full emotional engagement. People felt its pull without understanding why, and none resisted. The young pianist had not stopped. She continued to play, her hands moving fluidly, intuitively, with a grace that seemed effortless. Each note carried meaning, yet none were heavy-handed. The music spoke of life itself, of struggle, of joy, of loss, of discovery. It spoke to everyone differently, yet everyone felt equally addressed, equally seen. The experience was uniquely personal, yet shared collectively. A man standing near a large column felt the tears rolling down his cheeks. And yet he smiled, an odd mixture of sorrow and elation. He did not know why he felt both at the same time, only that he did. It was the music that had brought him here that had allowed him to reconnect with feelings he had neglected, and he knew he would never forget it. The air seemed heavier with emotion, yet lighter with release. Every person who had paused to listen felt the profoundness of the